So 2022 is firmly behind us, but before I shut that door, lock it and throw away the key, I've got one more thing to do. I need to let you know about my top 10 games of 2022 and talk about the 52 game challenge. And if you want to see that stuff, you just wait until after these. So hello friends and happy new year, because here we are in 2023 and we're about to take a look at not only my top 10 games of 2022 but also the 52 game challenge. Now firstly I want to put out there that my top 10 games of 2022 might not include games from 2022, because here at Generation Pixel we play games from every generation. And of course, since I took part in the 52 game challenge, which if you don't know was a project set up by Mark over at Geordie Slasher Gaming and Eddie at Rollercore, who have asked the community, well they asked them last year, to try and play 52 games within the 52 weeks of the year. Now I did manage to do this, which was quite surprising considering the type of games I tend to gravitate towards. But I managed it, but it's also made my top 10 for 2022 quite interesting, or at least quite interesting for me. So without further ado, let's get on to the games. And coming in at number 10, and unfortunately I don't have a physical copy of this game yet, is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now Guardians of the Galaxy took me absolutely by surprise this year, and mainly because of the absolute dumpster fire which was Marvel Avengers, which happened just before Guardians of the Galaxy was released. But let me tell you straight, if you're sitting on Guardians of the Galaxy all because of Marvel Avengers, then don't worry, it's a completely different beast. Now don't get me wrong, it's not a 10 out of 10 game, it does have its issues. For me, I did find the combat a little bit on the weak side, but it's the storytelling, and not only the storytelling but the interactions between the Guardians that will absolutely delight you as you play through this wonderful experience. So fear not, because if you thought that Marvel had totally destroyed their credibility in the video game market, they came back really strong with Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's well worth the 10th spot on my top 10 games of 2022. Next up is another game that I don't have a physical copy for, and I will be able to dig one out on the Switch thankfully, and that game is Valiant Hearts. Now Valiant Hearts absolutely took me by surprise, because I have passed over it time and time again, and mainly because of the box art. And secondly, even though this is a Ubisoft Montreal game, we all know it absolutely reeks of indie game, and Indie Avenue is an avenue that I rarely travel down. But of course, being part of the 52 game challenge has meant I've had to stretch my horizons and reach out into games that I wouldn't normally play. And when I got around to playing this absolutely fantastic gem of a game, it certainly tweaked my interest into dipping into more indie games as the year went on. The art style is absolutely fantastic and suits the themes of the game down to a T. And the puzzle solving 2D platforming reminded me greatly of games I used to play back in the mid 80s on the ZX Spectrum. But of course with a much more polished look, and of course better sound, because as much as I love the Spectrum, this sound is not where it's strongest. So Valiant Hearts was a huge surprise for me, but one that I'm so glad I got around to, and that's why it's number 9 on my top 10 games played in 2022. Coming in at number 8 on my top 10 games played in 2022 is another indie game, and another game that I don't have a physical copy for yet, and that is Spiritfarer. Now probably the best way to describe Spiritfarer is to compare it to Fallout Shelter, a 2D craft and survive game, although Spiritfarer's more of a 2D craft and don't survive, because the whole premise of the game is to take command of the Spiritfarer, find lost souls and help them pass on to the next world. Now I could go on for a very long time about Spiritfarer, but I'd rather you played it yourself. The art style is fantastic, the story is wonderful, and it's well worth being number 8 in my top 10 games played of 2022. Coming in at number 7 for the top 10 games that I played in 2022 is a game that I do have a physical copy for, and that is Monkey King Hero is Back. Now I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people don't even know what this game is, because it seems to have landed in every bargain bin up and down the UK, which is something that I found quite surprising considering THQ Nordic have got a decent reputation when it comes to the games they put out there. But for reasons beyond my ken, this game has managed to fly under the radar of quite a lot of people. Now don't get me wrong, it's not a finely polished AAA release, but for me when it comes to gameplay is king, and not only gameplay, you also need some decent story, and that's what really drew me into Monkey King Hero is Back. As an avid fan of Monkey Magic, which was a TV adaptation of Journey to the West, well, Monkey Hero is Back just seems to emulate the tone of that TV show perfectly. Well, it did for me anyway. Now the graphics might not be next generation stunning, but the art style the developers have decided to go with is absolutely perfect for this game. Gameplay will have enough to keep you interested until you get to the end of the game, and as I said, if you love the story of Journey to the West or Monkey Magic, or whichever particular way you experienced that narrative in the past, well, this game will then give you some wonderfully nostalgic feels about that experience from the past too. So yes, Monkey King Hero is Back, in at number 7, and it earned its spot in my list. Coming in at number 6, we have another game that I did pick up physically, and a game from this year, so hold on people, it's not going to be in any way, shape or form a past game or retro game, because the game that made it to number 6 in my top 10 games played in 2022 is Horizon Forbidden West. Now talk about a game that I was absolutely looking forward to coming out ever since I finished my first playthrough of Horizon Zero Dawn. Now oft times sequels can let us down because they can't capture that magic that the first game delivered, and with Horizon Forbidden West, well, there maybe is a little bit of an argument for that case, but mostly because we'd already experienced Horizon Zero Dawn, we were never going to get that sit up and take notice moment of the sequel. But that being said, Guerrilla have done an absolutely fantastic job in this game. All the little niggles in the gameplay mechanics that some people had during Horizon Zero Dawn, well, they have been sharpened to a fine point in Forbidden West. Graphically, of course, there have been some upgrades because we've moved on to the PlayStation 5. But for me, what this game truly delivered was a fantastic narrative when it came to a sequel. Now, I'll be quite frankly honest, I didn't know where they could go with the story after Zero Dawn, but Guerrilla have pulled it out of the hat one more time, and although I won't talk about the story because I don't want to spoil this for anyone who hasn't played it, this is probably one of the best sequel stories that I have ever experienced, and that's why Horizon Zero West is sitting there at the number 6 spot in the games I played in 2022. So here we are in the top 5, and things are going to get serious from now on in, because each one of these games are absolute bangers. I mean, don't get me wrong, these ones before were too, but these we're talking over 9 out of 10 games, well, in my opinion anyway, obviously. And the first, and coming in at number 5, is Yakuza 0. Now, the Yakuza series was a series that I was never going to touch with a barge pole. I've talked about this before, I will talk about this again. As far as I was aware or was led to believe, this was nothing more than a Grand Theft Auto clone series, and that was something that I had no interest in whatsoever. Of course, taking part in the 52 game challenges meant that I've had to reach out there and find some games that I could finish in short order, and Yakuza 0 was one of the games that was recommended on many of the websites that will let you know which games can be completed fairly quickly, and with it being on the PlayStation Premium service, it was readily available to me and absolutely free, so what did I have to lose? Well, as it turns out, absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. Now, I don't want to go into too much about the game because a large part of this game, or the large part of this game to me, is the storytelling in it. I will tell you, however, that it's an absolutely fantastic light RPG with a story that will hook you from start to finish. It has enough lunacy in it to keep the most demanding toddler entertained, and that's before we even get to the mini games. And let me tell you, if you're like me, you'll probably spend more than double the time you did playing the actual story game in the Sega arcades and playing things like golf, bowling, baseball and running a business. And that's why Yakuza 0 made it into the top 5 and was the number 5 game in my games played of 2022. Coming in at number 4 is another fairly modern game. It's only been out for a few years now, so quite surprised again that I've got round to play it so soon. So glad I did, because at number 4 we have Ghost of Tsushima. Now, Ghost of Tsushima was a game that I did want to play at launch and I just didn't get round to it, and a large part of that is completely and utterly my fault, because when it comes to new IPs, I often let them sit and ferment for a while before I have the courage to delve into a completely new character and story. But after finally getting round to playing Ghost of Tsushima, I was a bit disappointed in myself for not taking the plunge early on, because as a huge Assassin's Creed fan, even the modern Assassin's Creed games, Ghost of Tsushima is nothing short of the game that Ubisoft wished they had made as an Assassin's Creed game. Now, if that analogy puts you off because you're not a fan of the Assassin's Creed games, the modern Assassin's Creed games that is, then please don't, because as I said, this is the game that Ubisoft wished they had made as an Assassin's Creed game. The story is absolutely phenomenal, the combat is on point, it's graphically stunning, and it's just one of those games that deserves to be a 10 out of 10 game. And not only that, I managed to land the Platinum Trophy on my very first and only playthrough. I will be playing through Ghost of Tsushima again because it's such a fantastic game. It's just that when you're in the 52 game challenge, you've got to rein yourself back in from going back in and double dipping a game that you've already played and move on to something new. But now that the 52 game challenge is over, I will definitely be playing this game here, my number 4 game on the list for games played in 2022, Ghost of Tsushima. Now, coming in at number 3 is an absolute stone cold classic from the Sega Mega Drive. Now, I didn't play it on the Sega Mega Drive because I need to now get that into my collection. How I did play it was kind of physical, and that was on the Sega Mega Drive collection, and the game was Shining Force. Now, I don't need to speak too much about Shining Force because most people know exactly what it is. It's a turn-based strategy JRPG that is absolutely beloved by most people who love JRPGs, both strategy, turn-based and even action. The probable reason for me not playing this back in the day on its original release was that I was more of a PC gamer at that particular time. But let me tell you, if I'd have got Shining Force back in the 1990s and popped that into my Mega Drive, there would have been no looking back. It has absolutely everything in it that I want from a strategy turn-based JRPG. Great characters, great upgrade paths, just great everything. Now, of course, I do base the rankings for the games that I play by comparing them to what was there at the original time, because being almost 50 years of age, I have had the pleasure of playing every generation of console. Well, except for the Magnavox Odyssey, but does that really count as a console? So it's quite easy for me to slip back to the 90s or even 80s and judge a game fairly based on the time it was released, and Shining Force without a doubt would have blown my socks off. So I kinda wish someone had pointed me in the direction of Shining Force back in the 90s when it first came out. They didn't, and I took a different path. But it has been nice to play it in 2022 for the first time and have another 10 out of 10 game that I can happily go back to time and time again. So yes, number 3, Shining Force. Now we're at the really serious end of the list, and that's games number 2 and the number 1 game of 2022. Well, number 1 game that I played in 2022 anyway, and these games were the most difficult to separate. The rest of the list, and I'm going back 50 plus games, they managed to slot in quite nicely to how I ranked them. These two were, well, they locked horns from the moment I played each of them and had to then rank them against each other. Kinda like how Final Fantasy VII and Suikoden 2 lock horns up here every day to be my number 1 game of all time. But I did have to make a decision. I needed a number 1 and I needed a number 2, and it was one small factor that made the number 2 game the number 2 game, and that being that I played a remaster of the game. And it's a game recommended by Tom, the wonderful Tom over at Sega Head. If you haven't checked him out, go do that now. And the game is Valkyra Chronicles. This game was an absolute breath of fresh air, and I have no idea how I managed to miss this when it was released for the PlayStation 3. It has absolutely everything in it that I adore about JRPGs. It has a fantastic cast of characters, it has some wonderful upgrade paths, and the story is of course phenomenal. And not only that, it takes a strategy turn-based JRPG genre and injects this wonderful new life into it by giving it first and third person elements to play within the game. Now, when most people think think about strategy JRPGs, they tend to think about the grid-based setup. You know, the Final Fantasy Tactics, the Vandal Hearts and the like, and that's fair enough because that's where the genre likes to live. But with Valkyria Chronicles, they managed to inject in not only full 3D third-person action, but also some first-person action too. Whether you're a fan of strategy RPGs or not, then I can heartily recommend that you go out there and you pick up Valkyria Chronicles. You can get it for the PlayStation 3, the original release. You can get the remaster on PlayStation 4, and there's a whole series of games that comes after it if you do get the itch to play more. So Valkyria Chronicles, the Europa edition, the HD remaster, is number 2, but only because I didn't play the PlayStation 3 one, and that would have been a fairer comparison, I suppose. But it is in there at number 2. It's a 10 out of 10 game, it's a must play game, and yeah, it's worth number 2 in anybody's list. So here we are, the number 1 game, the game that I've decided was my favourite game of 2022. Well, favourite game that I played for the first time in 2022. It's another recommendation. This one was recommended from Jen over at Retro Rivals, and the game, she'll probably know exactly what it is straight away, is Alice Madness Returns. Now this game just came out of the blue for me. Yes, Jen over at Retro Rivals did recommend this game, did do a stunning review on this game, and did beg everyone who was listening to go and play this game, especially if they hadn't played it before. And because my trust in the Retro Rivals is so strong, I chose Alice Madness Returns to be the first game that I would play in 2022. This game has story by the bucketful. It takes you in and out between Alice's real life and of course the Wonderland life. There's exploration, there's puzzle platforming, there's 2D side-scrolling shoot 'em up, and even a little bit of Souls-like combat. Now, not quite to the level of Souls games, but you know what I mean by that. Graphically, it's absolutely stunning for the time, and where I was expecting a lot of jank in the game, I experienced very little, and the controls were perfect for me. There was no clunk in those controls whatsoever. And again, I'm not going to talk too much about the game, I'm just going to let you know that this was the number 1 game for me that I played this year for the first time. And absolutely, if you get the chance and you haven't played Alice of Madness Returns, even if you want maybe another second opinion, then go over to Retro Rivals, check out Jen's review on the game. But trust me, this game is absolutely phenomenal. It's a must play for any gamer, and there's just so much to it that you could go on about it forever. I'm so looking forward to being able to play it again, which I will be doing this year because I doubt I'll be chasing those 52 games. So yes, I'm very happy with the fact that Alice, the first game that I played this year, was my number 1 game of the whole year that I'd played for the first time. And if you haven't played it, I can only implore you to go get your hands on a copy of this. You can play it in the 360, you can play it in the PlayStation 3. I believe it might be on Game Pass if you don't want to pick up a physical copy, but you need to get this game played. It's absolutely phenomenal. You want a second opinion, pop over to Retro Rivals, check out Jen's review on it, and it will sell you what I'm selling you right here. Alice Madness Returns is a 10 out of 10 game, especially for when it was released. So now let's get on to the 52 game challenge, and I'm not going to talk about all, well, I think it was 57 at the end up, 57 games that I finished this year. What I'm going to do is give you a data blast, and that's kind of like the Bad Influence style. So you want to see what games that I finished this year, and a lot of them for the first time, and with some ranking scores beside them, then here they come now.